La 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 ya da na 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 da ya na 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 la 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 ya da 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 na 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 ya da 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 ay ay ya la 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 dum ba dum bum bum ba dum bum 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 ba dum ya ba dum bum ba dum ba ya da 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 ya da 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 ah da 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 la 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 ya da da ya da 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 ya 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 da 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 da. Good Vach, Shavua Tov, a good week to you, my holy sisters and brothers. Let's light up the darkness. Who's in the house on a Saturday night? Doesn't it seem like we were just here? These weeks go by faster and faster. Yitzhak in Minnesota, Shandor in the Bronx, Sharon in New Jersey, Bill in Missouri, Paul in Chicago, Steven in New Hampshire, Guy in Ohio, Melissa in Great Neck, all you East Coast people. And for that matter, what's the next time zone? Central, right? Central, then Mountain, then Pacific, right? And everybody who's up late on a Saturday night and starting their week off by learning, Yasher Koach. Fantastic. May you be strengthened to always do such good in your lives. Melissa in Great Neck, Joe in the Inland Empire, Belle in Texas, Karen in Northern California, Bella in Florida, Ryan in Jacksonville, Ella's in the house, Michelle in Southwest Washington. Welcome, everybody. We are on page Nun Ches, page 58 here in Tractate Gittin. This is the 19th volume of the Talmud. Allegedly the laws of divorce, but we haven't talked about divorce in quite a while. We've had one digression after another that was triggered by the sages instituting certain rabbinic decrees for the betterment of the world. And among these laws we encountered here in chapter 5, and we're doing a discussion of Mishna number 6 in chapter 5, that there was a war, a great war, and over the course of that war, where conditions changed, you can almost imagine, it wasn't a war, but if you think about COVID and what a, unbelievable, earth-shaking phenomena that was in our lives, and, the way that we handled certain public matters in 2020 was different than in 21 and in 22 and in 23. And likewise, in that war, as the persecution, there was a war between, the Roman army, and it began with the Jewish zealots and then other Jewish fighters as well. But the civilians who were not in the war were very much affected by the war. And one of the things that was going on is that there were thugs. Maybe they were Roman soldiers, maybe they were mercenaries, maybe they were Jewish collaborators, God forbid, who extorted land away from the landowners, and then they would turn around and sell it at a very discounted price to other locals in order to pocket some cash. And then the sages had to deal with these land transfers, and were they legitimate land transfers or not? And that was a question we were examining here in Mishna number 6. But what was this war, right? So it was the war that resulted in the destruction of the Second Temple, the destruction of Jerusalem, a national calamity of unimaginable proportion that we're still mourning to this day. And specifically in the 3 weeks that we're in now, and the 9 days begin this week, which lead up to Tisha B'Av, which commemorates in the Jewish calendar, the saddest day in the Jewish calendar, in fact, in which both of the temples, the first and second temples, were destroyed. It's when the spies came back with their report that caused the people to panic, the children of Israel in the wilderness prior to enter the promised land, that led a 2-year journey turned it into a 40-year journey, and a bunch of other calamities in Jewish history. So the 9 days which lead up to that begin this week, when Av, the Hebrew month of Av, begins. Rosh Chodesh is Wednesday, so it begins Tuesday night. So it's a very appropriate time to be reflecting on what that war was. And for the last 2 days, we've been talking about various aspects of the war, the story, how it began, the siege of Jerusalem, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai escaping from that siege, and receiving his request from Vespasian, who had just become the Roman emperor, to grant him Yavne and its sages. In other words, that rabbinic and Torah learning would continue. And that's how Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai really saved Judaism at that moment. And with the help of the sages over the generations, they crafted the Judaism that we practice today, in the absence of the Holy Temple where we could bring offerings. But we long for the rebuilding of that temple so that we can perform all of the commandments that can only be performed when the temple is standing. We picked this up on page 58a, and we're still talking about that war. Jeremiah predicted the fall of the first temple, right? As a prophet, he was told by God that this was coming. And he's responsible not only for the book of Jeremiah, but also for Lamentations, which we read on Tisha B'Av. And we begin tonight with a quote from the book of Lamentations on 58a, a couple paragraphs from the top. The verse states, "The precious sons of Zion, comparable to fine gold." I know what they're talking about, what Jeremiah is talking about is that as the city, as the temple was destroyed, in that case by Nebuchadnezzar and his Babylonian army, unspeakable horrors were visited on the Jewish people. Not so different than the Holocaust. We think that the Holocaust is an unimaginable horror, and the sheer numbers of that, 6 million Jews perishing in Europe. But, tragically, there have been unspeakable calamities in Jewish history, and the destruction of each of the temples. It was not just the loss of the temple, it was the loss of millions of lives and torture and all kinds of cruelty visited on the Jewish people by the invader, by the marauder. So the verse states, "The precious sons of Zion, comparable to fine gold." And this is talking about how the beautiful young people, the young men, the young women were murdered, were raped, were just unspeakable horror. So what is the meaning of the expression that the precious sons of Zion were comparable to fine gold? If we say that it means they were covered in fine gold, a literal meaning, well, this is difficult, but didn't the school of Rabbi Shelah say, 2 estera weights of fine gold came down into the world, one in Rome and one in all the rest of the world? Right? Meaning Rome was so rich and powerful as an empire that it contained half the gold that was given to all the world. So if so, it is certainly impossible to cover the inhabitants of Jerusalem with fine gold, as there's not enough gold in the entire world to do so. Rather, this means that they would be so attractive that they would disgrace fine gold because of their beauty. And the Gemara relates that initially, the noblemen of Rome would keep an image imprinted on a seal by their beds and engage in sexual intercourse opposite that image, so that these Roman couples would beget children of similar beauty to the youths of Jerusalem. And from this point forward, from the time of the Great Revolt, they would bring actual Jewish children, tie them to the foot of their beds, and engage in sexual intercourse in front of them because they were so handsome. I think it's in front of them. Perhaps it was with them. That the actual writing leaves off, and tie them to the foot of their beds and engage in sexual intercourse. It is related that it once happened that they did this to 2 children, and one of them said to the other, "Where is this affliction written in the Torah?" And the other said to him, "As it is written, quote, also every sickness and every plague which is not written in the book of this Torah," from Deuteronomy 28:61. Remember, Moses told the people that as they were entering the promised land, if as a nation we lived a life of Torah, then we would be visited with so many blessings, blessing after blessing after blessing. But if we as a nation abandon the Torah, we would be cursed in so many different ways. And so one of these captured prisoner youths of Jerusalem was asking the other, this particular degradation of having to stand here while the Romans are having sex with each other because they think they're going to have beautiful children by having us present during what they're doing. Was this predicted by the Torah? And, there was his catch-all, and also every sickness and every plague, which is not written in the book of this Torah. And the first one said, how far am I in my studies from this? I.e., how much more would I have to learn in order to reach this verse that you're talking about? And the other one said, well, had you gone on 1.5 columns, the Torah is written on a scroll in columns, and so, well, I'm just a little. One young person was saying to the other, I'm just a little bit ahead of you in studying the Torah, and you're about to come to it in a column and a half. Then you would have reached this. So the first child said to the other, had I reached this verse, I would not have needed you, as I would have known on my own that the verse was speaking about this. Rav Yehuda says that Shmuel says in the name of Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, what is the meaning of that which is written? My eye affects my soul because of all the daughters of my city. Lamentations 3:51. There were 400 synagogues in the city of Beitar, and in each and every one of them were 400 school teachers, and each one of these teachers had 400 school children. Well, 400 times 400 is 160,000, right? And times 400, we're getting into the millions, well into the millions. And when the enemy entered there, these school children stabbed them with their pens. And when the enemy prevailed and caught them, they wrapped the children in their scrolls and lit them on fire. So you're getting this picture of how cruel the Romans were and just, killed and tortured so many Jews. And the sages taught another Baraisa, Tosefta Orayos 2:5, relating to the fate of the Jewish children. There was an incident involving Rabbi Yehoshua ben Hananiah, who once went to the great city of Rome, where they said to him, there is a child in prison with beautiful eyes and an attractive appearance, and his curly hair is arranged in locks. And Rabbi Yehoshua went and stood by the entrance to the prison. And he said, as if speaking to himself, who gave Jacob for a spoil and Israel to the robbers? Which is from Isaiah 42:24. And the child answered by reciting the continuation of the verse. Did not the Lord, he against whom we have sinned and in whose ways they would not walk, neither were they obedient to his law. Again, as I've said a bunch of times, the sages understood and the prophets spoke that we lost the first temple and again the second temple, although it was at the hand of Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians or at the hand of Titus and the Romans. It was really our own misdeeds that caused that to happen. Right? And so this is Isaiah's verse is saying the same thing. Did not the Lord, he against whom we have sinned, and in whose ways they would not walk, neither were they obedient to his law. Now it's interesting that Rabbi Yehoshua ben Hananiah is using this quote sort of to identify that this youth that's in the prison is a Jew and an educated Jew. Similar to, there were Jewish children that were hidden during the Holocaust, and then they forgot, that they were Jews. I mean, they were taken when they were 2, 3, 4 years old. And then after the war ended, rabbis and other Jewish leaders were looking for these children. And they would go to orphanages, and how can you identify the Jewish children? They would stand at the front of the room and say, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu. And then the kids who had, their parents taught them the Shema, the bedtime Shema, they would finish the verse, and that's how they knew who the Jews were. So likewise, this is how Rabbi Yehoshua ben Hananiah knew. That this boy was not only Jewish, but very well educated, that he could finish this seemingly random verse from the book of Isaiah. So Rabbi Yehoshua said, I am certain that if given the opportunity, this child will issue halachic rulings in Israel, meaning he will be a great sage, as he is already exceedingly wise. And he said, I take an oath by the temple service that I will not move from here until I ransom him for whatever sum of money his captors have set for him. And they said that he did not move from there until he ransomed the boy for a great sum of money. And not even a few days had passed when this child issued halachic rulings in Israel. And who was this child? This was Rabbi Yishmael ben Elisha. Now, Rabbi Yishmael ben Elisha is the Rabbi Yishmael whose 13 principles of exegetical analysis, how we make how the sages made interpretations from the written Torah. We read that every day in the morning prayers. This is a very famous Rabbi Yishmael, who Rabbi Yehoshua ben Hananiah took out of prison, rescued, and he quickly became a great sage. His grandfather, Rabbi Yishmael ben Elisha's grandfather, was also named Rabbi Yishmael ben Elisha. And now we're going to learn about the grandfather. Rav Yehuda says that Rav says there was an incident involving the son and the daughter of the grandfather, Rabbi Yishmael ben Elisha, who was the high priest, the Kohen Gadol, at the end of the Second Temple period. And these son and daughter were taken captive and sold into slavery to two different masters. After some time, the two masters met in a certain place, and this master said, I have a male slave whose beauty is unmatched in all of the world. And that master said, I have a female slave whose beauty is unmatched in all of the world. So the two masters said, come, let us marry these two slaves to one another and divide the children born to them between us, as they will certainly be very beautiful. Breeding their slaves, their Jewish slaves. And they secluded them in a room. And this one, the son, sat in one corner, and that one, the daughter, sat in the other corner. And he said, I am a priest, the descendant of high priests. Shall I marry a female slave? And she said, I am the daughter of a priest and the descendant of high priests. Shall I be married to a male slave? And they wept all through the night. And when dawn arrived, they recognized each other and saw that they were brother and sister. And they fell on each other and burst into tears, so sad and forlorn that they were expected to breed as slaves. Here they were brother and sister, descendants of the high priest, children of the high priest. That in their forlorn misery, their souls departed. Right? They died of sadness due to their great distress. And with regard to them and others like them, Jeremiah lamented, for these things I weep. My eye runs down with water. Lamentations 1:16. And we'll read Echa, the book of Lamentations, on Tisha B'Av next week. Reish Lakish says there was an incident involving a certain woman named Safnas bas Peniel. And why was she called this? She was called Safnas because they would all gaze tzofin at her beauty. And she was called bas Peniel because she was the daughter, bas, of the high priest who served in the innermost sanctum, lifnei velifnim. Same root as Peniel. And it happened that she was taken captive, and her captor abused and raped her all night. The next day he dressed her in 7 garments and took her out to sell her. A certain man who was especially ugly came and said to the man who was selling her, show me her beauty. And he said to him, good for nothing. If you wish to buy her, then buy her, for there is no beauty like hers in all the world. And the potential buyer said, well, even so, I wish to see for myself. So the seller removed the 6 outermost garments, and she herself tore the 7th and rolled in ashes. And she said before God, Master of the universe, even if you have shown no pity to us and have allowed us to be disgraced in this way, that the noble men and women of Jerusalem were now, lowly slaves being sold as, prostitutes and sex slaves, why have you not shown pity? She's asking God, why have you not shown pity to the sanctity of your mighty name by which we are called, right? If we are called, the children of Israel and a nation of priests, the followers of God, isn't it a disgrace to God to see the Jewish people brought so low, is what she's asking. And with regard to her and others like her, Jeremiah lamented, quote, O daughter of my people, gird yourself with sackcloth and roll in ashes. Make your mourning as for an only son, most bitter lamentation, for the spoiler shall suddenly come upon us. Jeremiah 6:26. It is not stated upon you, but rather upon us. For the spoiler shall come, as it were, both over me and you. And what this is teaching is that when the Jewish people suffer, God might, God of course has a reason for making us suffer, for bringing us low, but it's not like, the Jews are suffering on earth and God in heaven is, just saying, oh, what can I, you brought it on yourselves, there you go. But rather, God experiences everything that we experience. When we suffer, God suffers with us. Rav Yehuda says that Rav says, what is the meaning of that which is written, Micah 2:2, and they covet fields and take them by violence, and houses and take them away, and so they oppress a man and his house, even a man and his heritage. And to explain this, where Micah, the prophet Micah, is saying, to the people, like, the way that you behave is just utter disgrace. There's so much, so much evil among the people, so much transgression that you're going to have to be brought low. And so this incident illustrates that. There was an incident involving a certain man who set his eyes on his master's wife, and he was a carpenter's apprentice. So one time his master needed to borrow some money, and his apprentice said to him, "Send your wife to me, and I will lend her the money." So the apprentice has more money than the master. I guess he just wanted to learn the carpentry trade, but he already had some money of his own. So the carpenter sent his wife to the apprentice, and the apprentice stayed with her for 3 days. And he then went back to his master before the wife did. And the master said to him, "Where is my wife whom I sent to you?" And the apprentice said to him, "I sent her back immediately, but I heard that the youth abused and raped her on the way." The master said to his apprentice, "What shall I do?" And the apprentice said to him, "If you listen to my advice, divorce her." He said to him, the master said, "But her marriage contract is large, and I do not have the money to pay it." The apprentice said to him, "I will lend you the money, and you will give her payment of her marriage contract." The master arose and divorced her, and the apprentice went and married her. That's what he originally wanted. So this apprentice is just a Machiavellian, conniving, wicked snake, right? Who came into apprentice with this carpenter and ended up stealing the carpenter's wife. But not only that, but lending the carpenter a whole bunch of money, which the carpenter was then not able to pay back. So what happens next? When the time came that the debt was due, and the master did not have the means with which to repay it, the apprentice said to his master, "Well, come and work off your debt with me." And they, the apprentice and his wife, would sit and eat and drink, while the master, meaning the woman's first husband, would stand over them and serve them their drinks. And tears would drop from his eyes and fall into their cups. And at that time, the Jewish people's sentence was sealed for remaining silent in the face of this injustice. And some say that the Jewish people were punished for 2 wicks in 1 lamp, a euphemism for the sin of adultery committed by this couple while the master was still married to the woman. Now you can see that, this is such a distasteful scene. These 2 adulterers basically, and there's this idea that the wife and the apprentice were already committing adultery while she was still married to the master. But not only, did she then run off with the apprentice, but they enslaved her first husband and made him, serve them their drinks while they were just, flagrantly in his face that they were together and what they had done to him. So it's just a level of depravity and wickedness, which is, hard to imagine. Okay, but what does that have to do with the fate of the nation? Many of the commentaries explain that this refers to the same incident, but they disagree whether the apprentice was guilty only of injustice and abuse or whether he was also guilty of adultery and had already sinned with her when she was in his house. And they also note that while the incident described here involved the sin of a single individual, nevertheless, the matter was not a secret, as it had public ramifications that were visible to the community. and as no objection was raised to the sinful behavior, the sin was attributed to the entire generation. That's the commentary of Maharsha. And the Yavetz writes that this incident demonstrates that in addition to sins that fall into distinct halachic categories, there are sins of deceit, abuse, and the causing of human suffering, which, although they are not explicitly mentioned in the Torah, carry much more severe punishment, right? So, it's a lesson to us. You see people behaving wickedly, abusing causing others to suffer, and we just ignore it because it's inconvenient. So then that becomes not just the sin of the sinners, but a sin of the nation. The Gemara returns to the Mishnah, right? We're going back to Mishnah number 6 here in chapter 5 about these rabbinic enactments to deal with the land that had been seized by the Sicarii, these thugs that extorted the land from people during that war against the Romans. So the Mishnah stated, if one purchased land from a Sicarius and afterward returned and purchased the same field from the prior landowner, right, that the Sicarius extorted the land from, so that the new purchaser will be considered the legal owner of the field. Well, this purchase is void. And Rav says they taught that the purchase is void only in the case where the prior owner says to the ultimate buyer, when he came to acquire the field from him, go, take possession of the field and thereby acquire it. As in such a case, the prior owner can say that he did not actually mean to sell him the field. But if he sold it to him with a bill of sale, the buyer acquires the field. And Shmuel says, even if he sold it to him with a bill of sale, the buyer does not acquire it unless the prior owner writes him a guarantee that if the field is repossessed by a creditor of the prior owner who sold him the field will compensate him for his loss, as by writing this guarantee he demonstrates that this is a true sale. Now we're on 58b. And the sense that you want to be getting here is that there's, peacetime law and wartime law, and that they need to be a little bit different because, when everyone is going crazy, when they don't know if they're going to survive another day, when they'll sell a whole field just to get a loaf of bread, do they really mean to sell the field for a loaf of bread? When peace returns, we need to evaluate those kinds of wartime transactions. It is taught in a Baraisa, the Tosefta 5.2, in accordance with the opinion of Shmuel, that Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says, if one purchased a field belonging to a married woman from the wife, right? So a woman brings a field into a marriage. If the couple divorces, when she leaves, she takes her field back. While the couple are married, the husband has the rights to the produce of that field, but he doesn't own the underlying field. She does because she brought it into the marriage. So if somebody wants to purchase that field from the couple, one way to do that is he really has to buy it from her. And if he wants to use it now, he's going to have to purchase the right to produce while this couple is married. Because even if he buys the field from her, the husband retains the right to the produce as long as he's married to the wife. If somebody wants to get that field outright, he has to buy the field from the wife and the right to produce from the husband, right? So if one first purchases a field belonging to a married woman from the wife, so that if her husband were to predecease or divorce her, the purchaser would then own the field fully, and afterward, the purchaser returned and purchased the same field from the husband, so that he will have the right to use it in the interim, so his purchase stands. But if he first acquired the field from the husband, the right to produce from the husband, and afterward he returned and purchased the same field from the wife, then the purchase is void. He bought the same two things, the underlying field and the right to produce. But because of the order that he bought the right to produce first and then from the wife, this is considered void. Why? Because psychologically, this guy made a deal with the husband and then the wife went along with it. But she might not have really meant to sell the field, and that's why it's being challenged. So if he first acquired the field from the husband and afterward he returned and purchased the same field from the wife, his purchase is void unless the woman writes him a guarantee. And this supports Shmuel's opinion that only when the prior owner writes the buyer a guarantee is it assumed that he sold him the field wholeheartedly. You have this extra requirement to make sure that this wasn't a case of duress, right? That a wife is kind of under duress since her husband controls her affairs. She agrees to the sale, but she didn't really want to sell this field that belonged to her family and that she brought into the family. So it's an additional protection for her. The Gemara asks, let us say that this Baraisa is a conclusive refutation of the opinion of Rav, who said that a written bill of sale suffices and the guarantee is not required. And the Gemara answers, Rav could have said to you, what is the guarantee mentioned here? It too is referring to a bill of sale, as it suffices that she sell him the field with a bill of sale, and it is not necessary for him to write him a guarantee in addition. The sage is taught in the Baraisa, if one purchased land from a Sicarius and consumed its produce for 3 years in the presence of the prior owner, and then the one who purchased it from the Sicarius returned and sold it to another person, then this prior owner has no claim against the second buyer. And the Gemara clarifies, what are the circumstances of this case? If the second buyer claims and says to the prior owner, after buying the property from the Sicarius, the first buyer returned and purchased it from you, providing you with proper reimbursement, then even the first buyer should be deemed credible if he claims that he purchased the property from the prior owner. And this is because he has been physically in possession of the property for 3 years, and this can serve as proof that he is in fact the legal owner. And if the second buyer does not claim and say to the prior owner, he purchased the property from you, then even if the second buyer should also not retain possession of the property, then even the second buyer should also not retain possession of the property. And this is in accordance with the principle that physical possession of property that is not accompanied by a claim that the property was legally acquired cannot serve as proof of ownership. A squatter does not acquire rights in the property. Maybe he can in certain ways, but not automatically, that's for sure. Rav Sheshes says, actually is referring to a case where the second buyer does not claim that the first buyer purchased the property from the prior owner. And although in general, physical possession of the property that is not accompanied by a claim that the property was legally acquired cannot serve as a proof of ownership, in a case such as this, the court makes a claim on behalf of an heir, and the court makes a claim on behalf of a buyer. Since heirs and buyers are generally unaware of the circumstances in which their predecessor obtained possession of the property, the court advances the claim on their behalf that it had been acquired legally. So on the one hand, the courts and the sages had to be very mindful of people under duress making deals that they did not really agree to. And that happened a lot during that war. And so they wanted to protect people whose land had been stolen from them, had been extorted from them. On the other hand, if you are, issue policies that are overly protective, then there won't be a real estate market. No one will be willing to purchase land if you're always waiting for some unknown claimant to step in who could seize the land that you purchased and worked and improved, etc. So they had to set some kind of limits on those protections, and that's what we're seeing here, where the court will step in at a certain point and say, okay, this deed is established, this title is established, and after that, if the claimant comes forward, we're going to have to deal with it a different way than pull up the land away from the buyer and return it to this original owner. And as to the other party, the first buyer, if he claims that he purchased the property from the prior owner, yes, he retains possession of the property, as his physical possession of the property is accompanied by a proper claim. But if it does not make such a claim, he does not retain possession, because the court does not make the claim on his behalf. The sage is taught in a baraisa, if property comes into one's possession due to payment of a debt or due to unjust seizure of the land by a Gentile, the previously mentioned laws of the Sicarii do not apply. Right? The Sicarii was a unique situation during that war. There's other kinds of cases where land is taken away inappropriately, but we don't deal with that using the law of the Sicarii. And the unjustly seized land itself must remain in the possession of the Gentile who seized it for at least 12 months before another buyer can take possession of it. The Gemara raises an objection based on the fact that the 12-month waiting period is relevant to the laws of the Sicarii. But didn't you say that the laws of the Sicarii do not apply in this case? And the Gemara answers, this is what the Baraisa is saying. Property purchased from the Sicarius himself must remain in his possession for at least 12 months before it can be established as his. Rav Yosef said, and somebody else could buy it from him. legally. Rav Yosef says that we have a tradition that there is no unjust seizure of land in Babylonia. Right? The war involving the Sicarii was in the Holy Land, in Israel, not in Babylonia, which was part of the Persian Empire. And the Gemara objects, but don't we see that there is unjust seizure of land in Babylonia? Rather say that there is no law of unjust seizure in Babylonia, meaning that this law is not applied in Babylonia. And what is the reason for this? Since there is a regional seat of government, Beit Davar, and yet the owner does not go and complain before it that his property has been seized, say that he waived his rights to the property and consequently is unable to bring a claim about it. In other words, the Jewish community in Babylonia, it was a nation, an empire at peace, right? And there was protection from the civil authority of the Jews in Babel that the Jews of Israel under the Roman oppression did not enjoy. So it is related that Gittin bar Relai received land from the residents of a certain valley in exchange for payment of the land tax, Tasca. All of the residents of the valley would jointly pay the land tax. After some of the residents had gone away, those who remained authorized Gittin bar Relai to use the land of the absentee owners on condition that Gittin would pay the land tax on their behalf. Gittin gave the money for 3 years in advance, although the tax was ordinarily paid annually. Eventually, after the first year, the prior owners came and said to Gittin, with regard to the first year for which you paid the tax, okay, so you've already consumed the produce. Now we will pay the taxes and we will consume the produce, and you will have no further rights to our land. The parties came before Rav Papa to decide the case. At first he thought of writing for Gittin a document of authorization to repossess the property against the residents of the valley, which would allow Gittin to hold the land for 2 more years in compensation for the money that he had advanced for the taxes. Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yehoshua, said to Rav Papa, if so, you made this law like that applying to Sicarius, and it has already been established that the law of the Sicarii does not apply in Babylonia. Rather, Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yehoshua, said, in this case, Gittin placed his money on the horn of a deer, meaning that he himself put his money in jeopardy. The money he had advanced is regarded as a gift, and he has no right to demand that he be reimbursed. He made a deal that he would have the rights to the land in return for paying their taxes, which those people couldn't pay. But the tax was paid annually, so the way they heard the deal, okay, so he'll pay our taxes this year, he'll have the rights to our land this year, and then next year we'll get it back. He heard, well, for as long as I pay the taxes, I have the land, so he paid it for 3 years. But that addition, the second and third year that he paid in advance, hey, that was a risk that he took, thinking that they wouldn't be able to pay their own taxes, and when they could pay their own taxes, he lost that money. He was out of luck. And you could say that they should pay it to him, since their taxes are already paid, and maybe he has to accept that money back. I'm not sure about that. But at any rate, this expression is a good one. Right, he placed his money on the horn of a deer. So somebody who makes very speculative, risky investments is understood to be putting his money on the horn of a deer that could obviously run off with it. Now the Mishna states, this is the initial version of the Mishnah. Later, our Mishnah, right, about the law of the Sicarii, it was stated first one way, and then the law changed, as we saw the law changed over the years of that war. Later, the court of those who came after the sages who composed the original Mishnah said, with regard to one who purchased a field from a Sicarius, he must give the prior owner 1/4 of the field's value. Now, this was in the situation where, right, the Sicarius came and seized land from a Jew. And then later he turns around and sells it to someone else. But the original one whose land was taken away, he never, He never agreed to have his land taken away, and maybe he sold it for $1, and he wrote his name because otherwise they would have killed him. So then when the Sicarius turns around and sells it to someone else, let's say it's worth $100,000, and he sells it for $25,000 to a local who gets a good deal, $100,000 parcel of land that he buys for $25,000. Now the Sicarius goes away. The original landowner says, I want my land back. So somebody says, all right, we'll pay the $25,000. So he says, I don't even have $25,000. Right? He didn't have any money in the beginning. He just had his piece of land. So he's not able to buy the land back. But what they ruled was maybe it won't be given to that guy, but some of this money, at least a fourth of the value of the land, has to be given to the original owner. Now, is that a fourth of the discounted purchase price or a fourth of the actual value? Let's keep reading. So when they recomposed the Mishnah, right, because this happened so many times and they needed to put in laws that would, be understood to be fair in this terrible climate. And so this is, it took a while to figure out how to deal with it, and this is what they came up with. Right? With regard to one who purchased a field from a Sicarius, he must give the original owner 1/4 of the field's value. Rav says he gives him 1/4 of what he paid by giving him a portion of the land, gives 1/4 of the original field to the original owner, or else 1/4 in money, whichever he prefers. And Shmuel says he gives him 1/4 of the land, which is 1/3 of the money that he paid. And the Gemara explains, with regard to what do these Amoraim disagree? One sage, Shmuel, holds that the Sicarius sold the field to the buyer for 1/4 less than its actual value. Consequently, the buyer must return to the prior owner the amount by which he profited when he bought the property from the Sicarius, which is 1/3 of the money that he actually paid. Right? In other words, they're saying, well, the field that you got, we know what it's worth. You got it for much less than it's worth because you bought it from somebody who stole it from your fellow Jew. So what it's actually worth, we'll let you keep the land, but the money that you save by buying it through this underhanded way, that money you owe to the original owner. So that's one way to deal with it. And another sage, Rav, holds that the Sicarius sold the field to the buyer for 1/5 less than its actual value, and consequently the buyer is required to return the prior owner only 1/5 of the actual value, which is 1/4 of what he actually paid. And the Gemara raises an objection from that what is taught in a Baraisa. This is the initial version of the Mishnah. Later, the court of those who came after the sages who composed that Mishnah said, with regard to one who purchased a field from a Sicarius, he must give the prior owner 1/4 of the field's value, and the prior owner has the advantage. If he wants the land, he takes what is due him in land, and if he wants money, he takes what is due to him in money. And when does this apply? At a time when the prior owner is unable to purchase the field himself. But if he is able to purchase it himself, he precedes anyone else. If the original owner has the money to buy his field back, it has to be sold back to him. And Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi later convened the court, and they counted their votes and determined that if the field remained before, meaning in the possession of the Sicarius for 12 months, then whoever first purchases the land acquires possession of it. But he must give the prior owner 1/4 of its value by giving him a portion of the land or 1/4 in money. And this is in accordance with the statement of Rav, but it is difficult for Shmuel. And that's if the Sicarius held it for a year. As presumably he held it for less than a year, then maybe it simply reverts. And Rav Ashi said, when that Baraisa is taught, it is referring to 1/4 of the total amount after the... And by the way, does the purchaser who bought the land from the Sicarius, does he know that he's purchasing it from a Sicarius who extorted the land from its original owner? Maybe he doesn't know that. Maybe he doesn't want to know that. Maybe he doesn't actually know that. What he knows is he paid money for a piece of land, and now somebody's showing up and saying, no, you can't have it, I want to take it back. It's my land that was stolen from me. You could see how it's a mess, a very messy situation. So Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, Rebbe, later convened the court, and they counted their votes and determined that I just read that. So Rav Ashi said, when the Baraisa is taught, it is referring to 1/4 of the total amount after the money reached the prior owner's possession. In other words, it does not refer to 1/4 of the money that the buyer paid to the Sicarius, but 1/4 of the field's actual value, which is 1/3 of what the buyer paid the Sicarius. Rav says, I was present for the counting of the vote in the court set up in the school of Rebbe. Now we're in 59a, and I know that this has been a little bit tough to follow and a little bit technical. This part now, I'm just going to read a couple paragraphs, and then I'm going to take questions. This is really interesting about how the sages deliberated, right? So Rav Ashi says, when the Baraisa is taught, it is referring to 1/4, etc. Rav says, I was present for the counting of the vote in the court set up in the school of Rebbe when they established this ordinance. And they would start with me first, asking for my opinion in the matter, although I was the youngest member of the court. And the Gemara asks, but didn't we learn in a Mishna in Tractate Sanhedrin 32a, in cases of monetary law and in cases involving ritual purities and impurities, the judges begin their deliberations with the opinion of the most learned member sitting on the bench as a demonstration of honor to him. But in cases of capital law, like a murder case where the defendant stands to be executed if he's found guilty, they begin their deliberations with the opinion of the youngest member who sits on one of the side benches of the court. Why? Lest the junior members be unduly influenced by the opinion of their elders, and people come to be wrongfully executed as a result. Right? Maybe the young judges will be afraid to contradict the opinion of the most learned judge in the room, so they always start with the youngest judges. And the matter involving Rav was not a capital case, so you would think they would begin with the most senior members. So why did they begin their deliberations with Rav, who was certainly not the most learned member of the court, as that designation clearly belonged to Rebbe? And Rabbah, the son of Rava, says, and some say that it was Rabbi Hillel, the son of Rabbi Volas, who says, the counting of the vote in the court in the school of Rebbe was different, as all of their deliberations and countings of the vote would begin with the junior members sitting on the side, whether it was a capital case or a monetary case or a case of ritual impurities. Why? This was because Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, Rebbe, was held in such high esteem that once he expressed his opinion, nobody would be so brazen as to contradict him. Nice, right? Nice system they came up with to deal with that fact. Okay, let's go to some questions or comments. I know the hour is late. Here on Gittin 58. Come on. Sharon, we read that Kina about the sister and brother every Tisha B'Av. Right, I think we do. It's part of the readings that we do on Tisha B'Av. Exactly. Okay. Thank you, my friends. That's what I've got for tonight. With God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow night, the regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific, for page 59. Good Vok, Shavua Tov. Have a great week.